Hi all. Today we're going to talk about markets. We've done quite a bit of background by way of observation, statistics, and so on, and economic theory. Um, but now we're going to go out into the street and we're going to see um, a market stall, for example, um, or the market as a whole with a number of stall holders. And we can see how this uh, seems to organize itself. Um, no one person dictates who sells what, who buys what. Instead, there's an availability of information, low transaction costs, and magically consumer demand and producers' supply it comes into equilibrium with prices supplying pretty much all the information that people need beyond what they assume, which is that the goods they provide um, uh, are what they're looking for, and they're trustworthy and so on. Um, so there's plenty of incentives to make that happen, and the normal incentive is in terms of self-interested profit, um, and um, a market economy is an economic system where all this comes together. Investment, production, and distribution decisions are guided by those price signals created by the forces of supply and demand. They follow what Adam Smith called the invisible hand. It's worth looking at the quote from The Wealth of Nations, his famous book. Every individual neither intends to promote the public interest nor knows how much he is promoting it by directing his industry in such a manner as its produce may be of the greatest value. He intends only his own gain, and he is, in this, as in many other cases, led by an invisible hand to promote an end that was no part of his intention. By pursuing his own interest, he frequently promotes that of society more effectually than when he really intends to promote it. I've never known much good done by those who affected to trade for the public good. Well, there's a bit of a statement there. Um, uh, so the market is, in that sense, uh, that market characteristic is driving specialization, someone who's particularly good at supplying a particular product. So they'll be able to combine the inputs in such a way as to do so economically at the lowest price, the most efficiently. An individual is out of 33 million individuals in the UK is driven by this invisible hand to specialize in such a way as benefits him and benefits the society at large. Under a command economy, that's slightly different in that Marxists thought, well, we know what people want. Why don't we just produce what they want? Why don't we command the factories to produce what they want? And each year, um, um, put that into markets, get it to the consumer, and not involve this individual, this sort of invisible hand. In part, that was due to the perceived market failure. And in a way, the market, it was more a social criticism than an actual failure of the market. The market was meeting consumer needs, and it was also creating the incentives, created rewards. Some people got very rich, some people got bigger houses than other people. Um, you know, not everyone's a billionaire, but billionaires are created particularly through technology and innovation. And to the thinking at the time, that was sufficient to say, well, why don't we look at doing this somewhat differently? Of course, it didn't quite end up like that. Instead that promoted autocracy and a sort of war economy sort of feel to the economy. And it led to that sort of most pernicious concept. Economists say that a little inflation is good, and that's generally the objective of the central bank. But in autocracy, you get a sort of slightly different take on this, in that a little war is good, a little command economy. Let's produce fighter jets, let's produce missiles, because we're good at it. And we'll have a little war, and a little war leads to a lot of war, and so on, just as a little inflation leads to a lot of inflation. So economists look at this and have generally been very supportive of the market economy, which doesn't require this social commentary, either from the right wing and militarism, or from the left wing, which can be equally prone to militarism and autocracy. In general, it was felt that the natural concern of producers for the well-being of their customers, because they were in business, and that's all they were in business to do. They wanted to get sales and move their stock from the market stall. And at the end of the day, if there's any stock left on the stall, for whatever reason, well, no one leaves the market hungry. So the classic market town generally has quite a nice feel to it, and for that reason, local authorities encourage street markets. It's part of a sort of feel-good high street society. So, as we've said, the main criticism of markets is social criticism. Not that markets are inefficient in meeting consumer needs with low transaction costs, but rewards beyond incentives appear to be divided unequally. And yet, that most controversial of tax is a wealth tax and tax on property, because property is illiquid. So the characteristics of a market economy, if we take all these market stalls, all these markets, all these supermarkets, we call them supermarkets, they're really a collection of stalls in a single place. Private property, clearly, individuals and private firms own land and buildings and goods, allowing them to buy, sell, rent assets to generate personal wealth. Freedom of choice, the consumers aren't dictated to, you shall have so many turnips. Consumers are free to buy what they want. Workers can choose their employers, and entrepreneurs can start any legal business. The motive of self-interest, businesses aim to maximize profit, while consumers aim to get the best value for their money, driving overall economic efficiency. The system of markets and prices, the price acts as the universal language. High demand drives prices up, signaling firms to produce more and invest more, while low demand drives prices down. Healthy competition, multiple sellers compete for buyers by lowering prices, improving product quality, and innovating, diminishing the tendency to restriction of the market and monopoly, and limited government intervention. Of course, there must be, government must provide a framework, the market should be able to function without people being violent, people upsetting stalls, and so on. So government is there in the background ensuring an order, a framework within which the market economy can work. So the price mechanism of supply and demand, consumer demand increases, prices rise, profits increase, and more supply is created. Consumer demand decreases, prices fall, profits shrink. So the benefits versus the trade-offs, the economic advantages include rapid innovation. Firms constantly invent new technology to bolster their own position in the market and beat their competitors. Consumer sovereignty, production mirrors exactly what people want to buy. And resource efficiency, goods are produced at the lowest possible cost to preserve profit. There's all sorts of things we can say as economists about what things should be, but that's a very Roman approach, if I can put it that way, of saying, well, this is how things should be, rather than, in sort of classical literature, the Greek approach of saying, well, this is how it is, and this is what's in people's minds. In terms of market failure, we've talked about wealth inequality, negative externalities, of course. If a factory is producing a product and has a toxic product to dispose of, if it disposes of it to a watercourse, that should bring down on it the authorities. So firms can't pollute to minimize cost. And then there's the whole issue of underprovided public goods, healthcare, defence, policing, education may lack funding if left purely to profit. But by the same token, social commentary can equally interfere with these public goods. Recently we've had a situation where, for no economic advantage, the government, or marginal, the government has impacted severely on education, and some would say have impacted severely potentially on farming. So this social commentary we have to watch, in that it can lead to the wrong direction and loss of public confidence in governance, which is probably the worst thing that could happen. So the economics of a market stall, if we think of an individual market stall itself, the stall holders reliant on high volume, they have low overheads and they have immediate cash flow. They can use card machines and so on. So their cash flow, increasingly, in our society, we're using cards and card machines. Retail shops have high property leases, high utility bills, and high staff costs. So the market stall continues to be a very attractive way of getting your production and your product in front of the customer. And again, that's all good information, and when it works, it's great. Success depends on very tight margin management and weathering seasonal drops. At the time of filming, we've got a heat wave, and that impacts on market footfall considerably. So we can say, if we go into our accounting mode now, we can say that daily revenue minus the costs of goods sold is the gross profit. minus the daily operating costs, the pitch fee, the travel, the insurance, and so on. That's helping us um, um, calculate profit and understand the economics of what's going on. And from this, we can calculate a break-even point, which is very useful, and we can work out how many units have to be sold each day in order to break even, and then take us into profit. So if we then that's our sort of ant's eye. If we have our elephant's eye, when people talk about markets in the bigger picture, they often think in terms of the stock market. And part of the reason for that is the correlation between the stock market performance and the economy. Again, it's all information. It informs how consumers feel, and what the news really is. People are very sensitive to it, and the macro picture. In terms of the central bank's task of maintaining inflation at a target of 2%. Again, the market is very important to informing the Bank of England what is happening, and in terms of market sentiment, sort of boom and bust and so on, and equities and bonds, that's a whole world of markets which in some ways differ very little from the market stall and the economics of the market stall. And quite often where things go wrong, it's because people don't understand how really simple market economics is, and again try to impose some kind of social thought on it. I'm thinking the sort of debacle with Liz Truss that we all experienced in the UK is still very much fresh in people's minds, and it's clearly important that people understand what they're doing and understand the implications of what they're doing. So I hope that's been helpful as a bit of a sort of guide to market economy and factors. And let's all hope those UK government bonds come back into fashion, and that people are attracted by their high price of the IOU from the government, and have the confidence to hold them again, which was so severely dented during Liz Truss's experiment, however well-meaning. So there we are, and see you next time.